Well, here we go. I'm removing the masking film and I make sure that I'm getting the paper nice and clean. You got to be gentle in this process, but it's coming off without any difficulties and creates that hard edge on the mountaintops there, and they've been protected. I wouldn't have wanted any of that color to get down into where I'm going to be doing snow and having to retain a lot of that white. So it enables you to, get things very wet and not have the water creep over the dam and flood everything. So uh, in this video, as it continues, I'm going to keep working top down, and next I'm going to be working on the house, and I'll be doing um, the roof. And the roof of that building is in reasonably good shape. There's moss growing in places, and you have to kind of introduce some color for the moss, which is pretty simple because it's usually like an olive green, a little bit of brown, maybe some yellow ochre in it, and that's going to go on probably first, and then to do their asphalt shingles. So to do all of that, you might want to draw fairly carefully so that you can see it through your washes, which I have done. And I might have to go over some of my pencil lines again. But it's pretty much ready to go. And of course, doing this, I want to be careful where I, dampen the paper because that's where the paint's going. So I'll probably use a small brush here to get that paper wet. And then we'll be on into the palette and putting on some color in the form of a wash for the roof of the house. So here you can see I've dragged some with dry brush technique, dragged a little bit of color across the shingles. There's a little bit of yellow ochre is one of the predominant colors there, and I've also created a kind of a gray that leans to the purple with using some Prussian and some alizarin crimson together, and a little black added to that, and that makes a nice soft shadow color. And then here I'm putting down a little bit of the undertones for where the moss is going to be. Of course, the moss is growing on the shady side there of that roof line. It's not a lot of it, but it's enough there to create a little interest. All right, so I'm now preparing to do a little more of the work around the eaves and underneath the overhang on the house there, and mixing some violet tones, which I do frequently for shadow areas, and sometimes it kind of goes to the red and sometimes it goes to the blue, but these colors need to recede, and you have to be conscious of what's going to come forward and what's going to move back. And right here, putting on a little background color in the windows, and the windows are reasonably dark through the window panes, but there's a variety of colors behind there because there's a window shade, and then also working behind the framework of the window. And so everything's being built in layers, and I always kind of begin with the base layer of whatever I want subsequently to be picked up and incorporated in the next layer. So as I go darker, this kind of rose color tone, this alizarin, will be mixed with the next layer that goes over it. And it's kind of the idea like using cells for lighting as you overlay various cells, you can create a lot more color, and this is one technique for that. I would never just load up a brush and just lay on one hue for covering an area that looks kind of uniform, because almost nothing is completely uniform, and that includes the white of this building. White, of course, isn't really just white. It's got a lot going on, and there's textures in this building, and there's areas where it kind of reflects a little bit of pink or some warm browns like yellow ochre, and there's how buildings age, the wood changes color and it comes through the paint. The paint gets a little dingy and you get some grays. So your white isn't a vibrant, Snow White, of course. And even though it's directly in the sun, you're gonna be wanting to show all the variations in the white. One thing you should probably be aware of is when you're working on textured surfaces that have very little color to them, you want to keep your brush strokes going in the direction of the wood, like the grain of the wood. These boards are put on vertically on the front of this place, so the colors that I apply there will be also put on vertically. If you go across, it works totally against what you're trying to achieve in terms of the architectural components. It'll flatten it out or make it actually just so it wouldn't be understood. But anyway, back in these windows, building up some darks and the combinations of shadows that hit the glass and some of the reflections and so forth. That stuff's kind of fun to do. Got a pretty small brush here, a liner brush working, and I kind of like liner brushes because there's various sizes, but you can really load them up with a lot of color, and you don't have to go back to your palette for quite a while because it'll keep feeding down those long bristles if you get a good quality one. So that's sort of the purpose of the long bristles on liner brushes, so that it holds a lot and it'll flow down. This is kind of like drawing, really. I don't have a lot of a sketch here, but it's not too much. It certainly isn't the kind of free form laying on a wash style of painting. This is controlled, and so the paper's somewhat dry. If you want to control where the paint is going, if the pigments, if you want to move it, you just first wet the paper where the area that you want it to go, and it'll get there. But you also have to be careful you don't wet the paper where you don't want it to go, because if you lose your white, then it's hard to get back. I mean, you can always mop it up or use a tissue or try to dab it and so forth, but all of that kind of leaves it leaves evidence behind. So best to not do it in the first place. So I'm kind of careful with these kinds of details. I sort of enjoy doing them. It's a lot like drawing, really. I like selecting the colors for this, and talk a little bit about the palette I've got going. I've got most of the browns, like raw umber, burnt umber, raw sienna, Van Dyke, and probably one or two others that I haven't mentioned, and then all of the blues from indigo and Prussian and cobalt, manganese. I don't use ultra very much, but it's on my palette. Cerulean. I've got some Payne's gray. I've got sap green. Cobalt green, hooker's green, olive green. There's a bunch of greens. And in terms for yellow, I usually just stick with cadmium yellow pale, and then there's cad orange. I usually have a yellow ochre and sometimes cadmium red, but rose and alizarin are kind of the reddish hues that I use. I don't use a lot of it, but I do use it. There's Davies gray, which is kind of a green gray, very drab. It can be useful for toning down things. I got a little touch of black. I think it's lamp black. And there's some Chinese white. And I don't use much white. It tends to bring down the chroma or intensity of the color, and sometimes makes it look a bit synthetic. It doesn't look organic to me. So now I'm going to be looking at the eaves and on the gable end here, and I'm painting the overhang as it turns and goes back to the house. Um, there's a lot of shadow that's being cast upon that roof, and then there's also the shadow created by the overhang in the front. The light source is kind of coming from the upper left, so you can see the directions that the shadows are cast. And I'm staying with some cool mixtures. I'm using some Prussian with alizarin crimson to get that hue, and sometimes I add a touch of black to tone it down in the shadows. Uh, so a little bit of Prussian, uh, and occasionally I'll use some cerulean and throw that in the mix. In fact, I attempt to use a lot of things, but in shaded areas, you find out that you want to stay on the cool side of the color wheel for the most part, and maybe throw in a highlight, just a tiny little accent somewhere. For the most part, blues, greens. There are some reds that don't pop; they kind of recede, but you want colors that do recede visually. And to an extent, you find that out through trial and error, but you can also observe it, and look at other people's paintings, of course, and find out what works for you. I always seem to come back to the same mixtures, and if I really want to push them deep, go a little grayer. But if you want to have a little light coming through them, you might want to take your brush and kind of create a mop and just hit a few spots and pick up a little of that color, like the side of the house there as it's going back under that eave. I'm going to keep that a little bit of light there. Even though it's going dark right now, it will dry lighter than it appears at this point. I'm going to keep moving around under the eave of the house and also start on the windows that are showing there in the front. And they're going to have some window shades across the top, and they're quite dark, um, reflecting the sky and the dark of the inside of the house. And then the framework around the windows is white, and as is the whole front of the place. So it'll have a combination of very lightly applied color in a wash that's probably dry brushes to create a little bit of texture.